would have. So you know what I'm saying? So like the FEC, the Federal Elections Commission, could not say or could not just go through that code and make sure the election was legit?
Well, certainly the public could not view the code.
Right.
But the code does tend to be escrowed, what they call escrowed, and so at that point it's in the Secretary of State's vault or somewhere,
right,
as the code. ES&S here locally, which was our vendor before Sequoia, they were caught with having the wrong code in the escrow account and running other code in California, and they were fined heavily for that. Anytime that you have proprietary intellectual property code, even if there is disclosure to an extent, you will never be able to get ahead of the vendors if they really wanted to play shell games with the code and so on. And
so the integrity is questioned essentially based on what, you know, your evidence you just said is a good example of that, right?
Well, you know, Glenn, talking about integrity, really what we are saying is not that there is the smoking gun, although there is perhaps evidence toward that. The idea is that since there is the ability for manipulation, and the Secretary of State's top-to-bottom review has shown that these systems are inherently insecure and flawed due to the intellectual property issue, as well as other issues that just happen to be poorly made mostly. You know, we're just trying to escape the trap that's been set, and the closer you look to this issue, really the worse it gets.
Right. I'm with you. I mean, I think, you know, there shouldn't be any wiggle room for you know, when it comes to voting and the practice of democracy, which is basically us voting on what we want in our society.
Well, I think we've witnessed the outflow of what many people consider to be botched elections,
right,
even if you don't want to stipulate they've occurred in this country, in other countries. So we know this is a great evil to be avoided, and anything that we can do to set precedent in San Francisco County or California, we should take those steps.
Right. And you talk about finances, so can you just give me a little breakdown of the money side, because I know it always comes down to money these days, and you know, if you can, you know, like how much it would cost, or how much it would cost in comparison with what, you know, is done now. I mean, would we be saving money on top of also legitimizing our elections by moving to this? And I would argue also that it really wouldn't matter if it costs more if the votes are right?
I would say.
Unfortunately, in this weird world,
yeah,
particularly those who want to create barriers to fair elections, and I think there are people out there that they would use money as a barrier, right?
Absolutely.
So, you know.
Well, there's certification issues
right
up front. The reality is with the open source code, since you take the sale out of the software, which is why Microsoft is not a fan of open source in general, but certainly not the spotlight that would be created by open source voting systems. If you take the sale out of the software, you've diminished the cost. There are other cost savings involved as well. The repetition of the sale in itself would be one aspect that would be considered beneficial to the counties to create their own systems.
Right.
Ideally, if we can get someone like San Francisco County, Los Angeles County to lead the way and do it in a peer fashion, the interoperability that I mentioned previous, other territories would be able to make use of the systems design and the work, and that would be ideal for the benefit of the entire country if counties would open their minds to that concept rather than just being focused on their immediate goal.
Right. Okay. Now, I want a couple questions. Well, one is, you know, in thinking about this a little bit more as you speak, it's kind of like, you know, how private industry sort of got involved with the military, and now you have private industry getting involved with public elections, and how sort of self-interest and their want to make money because that's their bottom line kind of creates a conflict with the best interest of this country.
I would say. Even now there are, well, certainly we know that the Diebold, the Sequoia, the ES&S, the Hart InterCivic, these systems are all relatively similar. And the backgrounds of these companies are interesting to look at.
Right.
Now we're seeing open source voting companies come into existence. We at the Open Voting Consortium have developed a system which we demonstrated at Linux World in 2008, which was the ballot printing system that I described. People are coming up with scanning systems. There's a group, Open Voting Solutions, out of New York that's been working on a scanning system. There's other companies now coming in that are well-funded,
Right.
that also have a little proprietary element in their system, but they're flying the flag of open source.
Right.
We also want to make sure that there are international standards, and that when it's open source, it's real open source, and not just another sale at the expense of security
Right.
and this work, which is so crucial.
So maintaining the integrity of open source voting, essentially.
Absolutely.
So, question, and you mentioned San Francisco a couple times, and it could, be a forebearer or a model, both San Francisco and, the state of California. How much luck have you and your colleagues had in getting this strategy implemented of open source voting, both at the local level here in San Francisco and then on the state level? Have you had success lobbying, those people who can make the changes? Yeah, how have your efforts to get legislation passed gone?
Well, at the federal level, we've had open source language in federal legislation. There was a Rush-Holt bill where the language was in, but then was taken out. And I think that's a Microsoft lobbying issue.
Right.
With Representative Conyers, there's open source language. There is a necessity for the language in these bills to be very concise so that there are no loopholes. When they soften it, it becomes that situation where a bad bill is worse than no bill at all.
Yeah.
So now, on the state level, we suffer, again, the corporate interests on this. But we have made gains. New York State waived their certification fees for open source voting systems, which is crucial and a big barrier to these smaller open source companies that would really benefit the community with their think tanks if they were allowed to get in the arena. And a $4 million certification process that is really broken in itself because it deals with intellectual property code is a barrier that we're trying to overcome. So New York State has waived that. Locally in San Francisco County, we're in the local voting system contract regarding Sequoia, that at the time open source systems become available, they have to sort of ante up at that point and disclose. So that was a gain. And then we're in local resolutions and so forth, where most of the higher ground groups and people advocate.
Right. So you're making progress, essentially.
It's a slow battle, very, very laborious. There are gains, but we need to move quickly and expedite because there's always more elections coming, and each one has so much consequence naturally that we really feel
high
like
stakes.
it's moving too slowly.
Right. And so, and your website's right down there for people who want to get involved. And I can't read it; it's so small. But it's openvoting.org.
Yes, www.openvoting.org.
Find you and get involved.